Welcome to B Major Productions. My name is Brian. I am a high school band director and arranger. And on this band arranging video, we're going to talk about three elements in your compositions or arrangements: texture, voicing, and range. All three of these elements are super important into your sound signature that you're looking for when you're writing music or when you're arranging music for a specific band. And we're going to look at a excerpt of a popular song to see how we can utilize all three of these elements and how we can get the best sound possible from that arrangement. So the first element that we're going to be looking at today is range. So when I say range, I'm referring to the instrument range. So when we're talking about instrument range, it has to deal a lot with the difficulty of your arrangement. It has to do a lot with the skill level of the group that you're arranging for. And if you're doing a general arrangement, then you kind of have to fill in the gaps of what do you think that the general band member can play at their level. So I have a few of the ranges up here, and I want to just take a look at them real quick. So we're going to look at piccolo first. So with the piccolo range, let me just, we have to understand that the piccolo is going to sound an octave higher than written. Okay, so this middle B flat right here, pitch wise, is going to actually sound an octave higher if that piccolo player is playing it. Now, if they're a flute player and they're playing that, it's going to sound exactly as it is on the staff. So when we're talking about building out the range, typically if you want to get much a higher pitch from your flute section, if you want them to come out a little bit more, because a lot of times in a marching band setting, it's going to be harder for those flute players, especially if they're playing on the staff or a little bit above the staff. It's going to be hard for their sound to cut through. So a lot of times we'll take essentially what the trumpets are doing or the clarinets are doing, we'll put that up an octave for the flutes. So a lot of times flutes will be playing with many ledger lines above the staff. That's just for purposes of them being heard. When you're in a marching band setting, there's a lot of brass. There's a lot of loud brass that essentially that they're competing for, and they don't have the luxury of having acoustics that they can naturally bounce their sound off of. So a lot of times we will have to put woodwinds in more extreme ranges for those notes to be heard. Now, when it comes to piccolo, because piccolo is an octave higher than flute and an octave higher than written, if you write flutes in the upper register for piccolo, if you play them in upper register, their sound is going to cut through. Like their sound is going to cut through a lot, especially if you have some very skilled piccolo players. So typically, because of that, I wouldn't write anything lower than a B flat on the staff for flute or piccolo, because a lot of times anything lower than that is not going to be heard, and even right there on the staff is going to be extremely hard for that any of these sounds to be heard. Now, if you have a younger flute section, then yes, you probably want to put things kind of in what we'll say grade 1 to 3 concert band range for those flute players, just so they can still be engaged and still be involved. But once they're able to get better at that upper octave, then yes, you're going to want to put them up in the upper octave. So this range right here that we have established right here, you're going to want to write them in that upper range a lot more so that their sound could be heard. Now, clarinet is a very interesting instrument. So with clarinet, I put on here a vast range. I put from clarinet's lower register all the way up to its upper register. So why did I do that? So I've seen in cases where, let's just say you have a lower brass melody. Maybe you have euphonium playing, euphonium, mellophone, tenor sax. Maybe you have those instruments playing. Um, and what I've seen other arrangers do, they will copy and paste whatever the baritone, euphonium, tenor sax is doing, and they'll copy paste that into the lower register of the clarinet. And a lot of times, what this does, it does give a little bit more of a warmer sound. So usually, we'll see this in like a ballad, where the texture is a lot thinner, where there's not a lot of instruments playing, and you can actually put the clarinet in that lower register. It gets them, if you want to challenge those musicians, it allows them to play in different ranges of their horn, but it gives a nice warm sound to what the euphonium, tenor sax, maybe lower mellophone is doing and trombone is doing right there. That gives them a little bit more body to their sound. But typically, what you're going to do is have the clarinet copy and paste essentially what the trumpet range is doing. But in these upper, more extreme registers of clarinet, sometimes we get the same issue with flutes, where if they're too low onto the staff, they're not going to be heard. So if you have a particularly stronger clarinet section, you can write in these upper registers because that sound is going to pierce a little bit more. It's going to stick out a little bit more in the marching band setting, and they can kind of hang around where that flute range would normally be if you start putting them in this upper register. Now, when we look at saxophones, they're pretty much in their same register. Reason why they're pretty much in the same register, regardless of their alto or tenor. What I basically put right here is G to D is the practical range. Now, am I saying this is, this is the de facto range those instruments have to play in? No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that when you have them within these ranges, especially in the marching band setting, you're going to get the most out of their sound. So the biggest role of the alto sax, and to an extent the tenor sax, is filling out that middle voice, that alto voice essentially. And when you have anything lower than a G on alto sax, it's very hard for that to be heard. Even a low G itself is going to be a little bit harder to be heard. So really in this range right here, which I'll say from D to D, that will probably be your sweet spot for alto sax. That's the range where you're going to get the most sound out of them. That's the sound where they're going to blend the most with either a lower trumpet part or with the mellophone part. That's where you're going to get a lot of that sound. Now, then it's lower register. Let's say if you're working with a lower mellophone part, then hey, you might be able to copy and paste what the mellophone is doing with the alto sax, and that gives you a little bit more body for that type of sound. Now, right here, these notes are theoretically, yes, very possible to be played, but it gets really shrill. It gets really shrill. The fingering gets a little wonky for the saxophone, so I would very sparingly play in this upper range for saxophones. And alto and tenor will share pretty much the exact same fingering. Tenor sax is a little bit different only because the tenor sax can blend a lot more with what the euphonium is doing, but it can do whatever first trombone is doing. It can blend with horn. So tenor sax is going to be a very flexible instrument. Typically, the upper register of the tenor sax, again, this kind of sweet spot right here, is going to shine the most. But it can, if need be, get down to that lower C, and kind of same thing with clarinet. If tenor sax is playing that lower register, especially if you have some players that can really support their sound down there, it's going to give a lot more body to whatever instrument they're playing with. So if they're playing a unison line with euphonium and trombone, and it has to get sort of low around here, it's going to make that sound a little bit more fuller, with a little bit more body if it's playing down there rather than if it's playing up an octave. But again, a lot of that has to deal with voicing and how you use those instruments. Now, horn and F, or mellophone. A lot of times you'll see the mellophone part either double what alto sax is doing or double with trombone doing, or in some instances you can have it double what trumpet is doing, usually like it down an octave in terms of concert pitch. Now, the sweet spot I will say for mellophone or horn will be from F to, I'll say, about this G or A. Okay, either those two, that range from F to G or A, that is the sweet spot for mellophone. The higher we get is going to pierce. So again, if you have more strong players, then you can play right up there. You can put their parts up there, but normally I try to keep mellophone within the staff. If you keep mellophone within the staff, it's going to really fulfill that role of a middle voice. That's where it's going to be the strongest. And just for a sake of blending well with those lower voices, this C right here for mellophone, that's the equivalent to the F above the staff for trombone or euphonium. So if you have like a line where you're dealing with the upper register of the trombone euphonium, that's essentially the middle register, or that sweet spot for mellophone or French horn. So that can allow, again, beef up that sound and give you a lot more. Um, you can have the middle and upper brass work together in that range. All right, so trumpet. Typically, with trumpet, I would say no lower than C, and even a C below the staff is going to be a lot harder to be heard, just depending on the voicing. But a lot of times, that low C, the concert B flat, that's not going to be heard super super well with trumpets. Um, I would practically say around A and above, maybe even G and above. That's when you start to hear the trumpet sound a lot more stick out in comparison to what the lower brasses or what mellophone is doing. Now, so I put practical range essentially C to C and a span of 2 octaves. However, this extended range, you have like C, we have excuse me, we have D, E, F, and G. That's more of the screamer range. That's more if you have some super powerful trumpets or you have some very talented trumpet players that can play in that upper octave and play very effectively. What I put right here, I just put the same thing as 8 VA, just because for the sake of readability. Even if you want to put the trumpet parts all the way up there, if you can write that up there with trumpet players in mind, it just might be easier just put 8 VA just for readability's sake, to make it just easier to quickly pick up on that music. But again, I would consider that extended range. Same way I put it for mellophone right here. I consider this extended range. You're going to need some serious players to be able to play up there. All right. Then we go to trombone euphonium. Um, I mostly like to think of trombone and euphonium as the same practical range as a trumpet, but just an octave lower. So um, I wouldn't go really anything lower than an A. Um, G and F is just going to be hard to hear here. Even in the context of a concert band setting, you go to that G and F. Usually, if a trombone euphonium is going to G and F, is either supported by the tuba. They're usually doubling something that the tuba is doing, or they have the triggers for F attachment trombones, bass trombones, or euphoniums with the fourth valve to get to that lower register. And again, that's usually to support something that what the tuba is doing or lower reeds is doing. But in the marching band setting, a lot of that range, that lower range for trombone euphonium is going to be lost. So typically, I would try to write nothing lower than an E flat, especially if I'm dealing with chords for trombone euphonium. There may be some elements sometimes where you want that you want to trombone euphonium to feel like a baseline roll, so you may have them right here on the staff. But I find a lot of times this range right here, I'll say B flat and above, that's going to be their sweet spot. That's where they're going to speak out the most. It's going to be easier for the players to project their sound in this register rather than in this lower register. Um, and again, the extended range, I kind of think of it a little bit same thing as trumpet, just going a little bit higher with that concert um, C, concert D. That's going to be really pushing those players, and it's going to kind of thin out that sound a lot. All right, and then finally for tuba, um, tuba is a very interesting instrument because obviously it serves, the main purpose is for the tonic notes and for bass lines. And a lot of times with tuba parts in marching band, they're copying whatever a bass guitar is doing or a synthesized bass. And a lot of times those instruments are written on the staff or a little bit above that staff. And that's just, the natural sounding of those instruments. But tuba, once we get into this register right here, they can get a little thin, but with a talented tuba section, they can really shine in this register. So from G to G, they can really shine in that register. Um, if they really focusing on range and making sure that it still has a full bodied sound right there, you can have some really wonderful writing with tubas in this range. Typically wouldn't do anything with an A, B flat or above. That's pretty high. G is high enough for standard B flat tubas as it is. But in this lower register, this is where you can really shine as well. This lower register is when you get that real essence of bottom. So if you want a really warm sound in your compositions or really warm sound in your arrangements, this lower register, that's where you want to be. That's the area where you want to really like um, have the tubas either doing long tones. A lot of times with if it's a constant selection, you might want to have them down here in this area. Or if you have chords that's a little bit lower in from trombone euphonium, then you want to have that tuba line a much lower. If you're trying to do color notes in the tuba, so extensions of the chord or notes that are just outside of um, when you're having like flat sevens or nines, things like that. When you're adding those type of color notes into your to your chords, it's easier when that tuba line is much lower than what the trombone euphonium is doing. I would say like an octave plus, because that really gives you enough space into there between them that you don't have any clashing of the notes. All right, so tuba you can utilize a lot of different ways. Um, when it gets to that low F, it's really hard to hear. Um, Again, unless that those players are like really pushing some sound, and of course we got pedals, but that's more of like an extended technique type of thing. Um, Typically, you wouldn't write pedals, and if you do, you would just do the eight. You'll do the octave sign on there, just so you're not writing all the way down here with all of these ledger lines. So range is very important when you're writing your music. Um, Typically the higher you go, the more you get out of that middle range, outside of that comfortability range. That's when instruments can sound a lot more thin. And sometimes this is a matter of style. If you want that kind of open sound, you may write your instruments much higher. But sometimes if you want a more thicker sound, much more compact sound, you may write it where all the ranges are much more closer together. What I mean by that, so if your trombone euphonium is more in their upper range, you will have mellophones in their middle range. You may have trumpets in their middle to lower range, just so that that thickness of sound is a lot more cohesive than when it is open with bigger different sounds on there. So that's our range discussion. We're going to look at a piece by Bruno Mars called Chunky, and we're going to see how that is utilized for texture and voicing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about range in that aspect as well. Okay, so we have an example arrangement of Chunky by Bruno Mars, and I purposely left a lot of stuff open so we can kind of look at and see how we can utilize texture, um, voicing, and how range affects all this. So the only thing I have right here now is the bass line, chords, the melody, and essentially the counter melody. So let's just see what we have right here. All right. So some of these things are clashing, and some of these things we can better represent through the different instruments. So let's look at this piece by piece. So I'm going to go into studio view so I can mute some things. So let's start in the melody. So we have the melody right here with trumpet. So let's just see here just the melody itself. All right, so this is, like I said, this is more of the upper range of the trumpet. Um, it's not as well supported. If you have some decent first trumpets, there shouldn't be any problem with them. Now, if I want to make sure that all the trumpets can participate in here, what I would do, I'll just take this entire line, transpose it down an octave, and preserve the original notes. And now my younger trumpet players, they can instantly still participate with the melody, no problem. So let's hear that sounds. All right, and that still keeps it in a very comfortable range. Now, if I want more body to this, if I want another voice doing this as well, what I would do. So let me do this first. Let me undo the transposition. I'm going to copy all of this and I'm going to paste it right here on the clarinet part. All right. And essentially, so let's say if you're just doing one clarinet part, you can almost just copy and paste exactly what the first trumpet is doing with the clarinet part if you just have one clarinet part, and it's going to be perfectly fine. So let's listen. All I'm doing is building up that sound. All right. So if we want to add another octave to that, what I'll just do is that same thing. I'll copy and paste it into our piccolo part. Right. And right here, honestly, we can kind of keep this as is for our piccolo part. So let me move up a little bit. So what we have right here in the piccolo part, we can pretty much keep this the exact same way it is, the way it is. Sorry, let me move my screen so you can see the piccolo part a little bit better. Okay, let's try this again. All right, so that's already a comfortable range for a piccolo part. For flute, that may be a little bit harder for those instruments to be heard, but like I said, if you have younger flute players, you put them in this range, they're perfectly fine. They can contribute. They may not be heard as well, but they can contribute. Now, if you want, you can take this line, put it up an octave, and if you want synchronicity between those two parts, you can write it like this and say piccolo players play the lower octave, flute players play the upper octave. If you say that or you write that into the arrangement, now they're playing essentially the same pitch. They'll be playing in unison because the flute player is playing this upper register right here, will be playing the same pitch as the piccolo players playing down here. Now, this is only written as a piccolo right here. So it's going to be a lot more piercing that we hear on here. Now, again, that's you can keep your piccolo players up there in that register if they're strong enough to play up there, but it is pretty high. So that's again, that's going to be depending on who you're arranging for. If you have a college section, they should be able to play up there on their piccolo part, and they're going to really cut through at that range. Otherwise, you can keep it how it was written. So let's just keep it right here on the staff since we have it as a piccolo part, and I'll take this trumpet part, put it down an octave, preserve original notes. All right. And now we essentially have this melody being represented in 3 different octaves. So let's hear how that sounds. All right. So good. Now, when we're talking about texture, if I have the melody represented on 3 different instruments, which you will typically see in a marching band setting, you'll typically see the trumpet, um, clarinet, and flute piccolo. You'll typically see those 3 groups together. They'll typically do all the same things, all the same parts, and just like I said, for the sake of those upper woodwinds being heard and cutting through, you're gonna have to put the clarinets high. You're gonna have to put the flute and piccolo high. And you can do other techniques, like I said earlier, where clarinet is playing that lower register to help beefing up what those lower voices is doing. But I would only do that in a sense where, hey, like let's say it's a slow piece, and the only instrument that has the melody is euphonium and tenor sax. Then absolutely you can put the clarinets right there, and let's just say piccolo flute is out, trumpet is out, maybe even alto sax is out, and the only thing we have is those lower voices. Then yes, you can put that clarinet in there to give it some body. But most of the time, you're going to do the clarinet the same thing that the trumpet is doing. All right, and then talking in terms of texture, when you have those octave displacements of that melody, that's going to strengthen the purpose of the melody, because now it's going to be heard in three different octaves. It's going to have three different ways for it to be picked up and heard and cut through what the rest of the band is doing. Now we have the melody essentially down. Let's look at this counter melody. So let's see what we have right here for saxophone. Now you can even hear in this in the MIDI version of the saxophone that it's it's a little shrill. So even though these are the same pitches that essentially would be in the actual song itself, it's a very shrill sound. So right here, we zoom in some. So as we see, yes, it's in that upper register. Like I said, I typically wouldn't try to go past that C, because that D and E fingering gets really wonky up there. Using a lot of palm keys. Um, and again, depending on the skill level of the player, it may be harder for them to get up there, especially when you have um, weird runs like this. So if I wanted to, I can take this down an octave, and let's see how that sounds. All right, that instantly puts us in a more comfortable range. And if I wanted to keep essentially what these notes right here, if I wanted to keep it up here, so it can still have that power of the chord, I can just rewrite this so we can keep that. Now right here, we still have those higher notes here, but since they're just quarter notes, we can kind of get away with that, because we gave them 2 beats to prepare and get ready to play those higher notes. So I can take this, copy paste it right there. Have something similar right here, but we cut off this part right here. Oops, didn't do that. Okay, and let's hear this in context. All right, and so now we still get that role fulfilled of that little counter melody line. Now let's hear that in context with the melody parts. All right, and now we have a lot of clashing right here. So let's try doing this. And sometimes arranging, it's problem solving. So sometimes it's just taking elements and trying to make them fit within what else you have arranged. And sometimes, we have to take in consideration, sometimes these songs are done in digital mediums. Maybe that they're done with synthesizer notes, not real instruments, and so they may not have those clash notes that we would typically hear when we're dealing with wind instruments. So let's see how that sounds with those quarter notes down octave. So this still right here, I'm not fully happy of how that sounds. So I might just go back in there later and change that. Now let's talk about texture again. So now we have a lot of heavy texture on the melody. We have three different instruments representing it and in three different octaves. Now, if you want to give more body to this counter melody, there's several things we can do. A lot of times, the easiest thing to do is just take exactly what alto sax has and copy and paste it with horn. Now, we come into a little bit of a problem here. The way Finale did this, it put this little line right here very low. Let's just hear how that sounds by itself. That's way too low. So you have to be smart as an arranger and understand what you're going to how you're going to get the best sound out of it, because that is not going to be get you're not going to get the best sound out of that, especially if that's supposed to be copying what alto sax is doing, and that's the only line that's in that octave is not going to be heard. So what we're going to put this up an octave. Now, putting this right here, we'll put it in the same register as alto sax. So it's pretty high, but if you want that full same pitch going on, this is how high it's going to be. So I'm going to take the rest of this, put it up an octave, and we'll have this for a horn. And if I wasn't comfortable with that, I would probably just take this little line, that D D. I'll just take that down an octave. So instead of being the B flats above and the G above, I'll just put that onto the staff itself, and that'll be a lot less taxing on the horn players. But let's hear this in context to see how it sounds. So I wouldn't even keep it right there. I would take that horn part and I'll just take this, put it down an octave, because that to me that's going to give this instrument the best sound. Right, it's going to give it the best chance to be um, heard without any type of strain on the player, and it's going to make it a lot more accessible for somebody to quickly pick that up. All right, so let's hear that in context. And one thing I forgot to do is erase this part right here. All right, so now let's say I wanted even more sound from those middle voices. If I wanted more from that, ba-da-dee-dee, ba-dee-dee-dee. So again, tenor sax can be a very flexible instrument. So if I take this line, just say we copy and paste it right there. These notes right here, way too high. Okay, that's way too high. But this, even though that's in the lower register for the alto sax, that is going to be in the sweet spot for tenor sax. So that little line right there, that is going to be perfect for tenor sax because it's going to be able to speak a lot better right there in that range. So what I would do, and because this is, I can quickly do this on finale, right here for the trombone part, I put the chords right here because we're going to eventually get to those chords. But we have a F9 right here. What I can do is put this in concert pitch, scroll back up right here, and on finale, when you do concert pitch, it's going to put tenor sax in bass clef. So it's going to be essentially the same way you will look at a trombone euphonium parts. That's how they represent the tenor sax part. Okay, so let's just say I would put this under, let's put it concert A. Let's see how that sounds because that gives it way closer to this little line right here. And typically you're not going to chord up tenor sax. You'll chord up alto sax, but in the marching band setting, you're not going to chord up a tenor sax part. Jazz band, yes, absolutely. Very rarely you would have chorded tenor sax in a concert band setting because usually there's only one tenor saxophone in a concert band setting. But in a marching band setting, you almost never put chords with tenor sax. So if we put that right there, we'll just put this right here. So we have GM7. So if I want to keep it somewhat close to the voicing right here, I'm just going to put it with the G's. All right. And then from there, we're just able to copy and paste. Or, my bad, this part right here. Now, this may look ridiculous right here, but remember we're still in concert pitch. So we put this out of concert pitch. Hey, that's still very comfortable in the tenor sax range. So we set 2 concert G's right here. Okay, and just for the sake of this right here, we'll just put 2 G's right there. All right, so now we should have even more power to that counter melody. Let's listen. All right, so good. Now we have a lot of help right there. Now let's focus on chords. Let me, oops, sorry. I'm gonna move myself back up here. All right, so let's talk about chord voicing. Now, in this context, the chords right here, they can actually work in this root voicing. All right, so typically if you're just doing standard chords, you can literally just stack them on top of each other. So how I have it right here, where they're just all stacked on top of each other, if you just want very basic chords, they can function just like this. All right, and It sounds like it's missing something. That's just because we don't have the bass line here. Bass line is basically giving us all of those lower harmonies for the most part. So the chords will make a lot more sense when you have that bass line with it. Now, how do we represent these chords within trombone and euphonium? So we have an F minor 9. So essentially that means if I were to complete this voicing, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pitches that we would have to represent in this chord in order for it to be heard. Okay, so like I said, sometimes your role as a arranger is problem solving. How do we take something that's just something that's done on a keyboard, something that's electronic, and make that make sense in the context of a trombone 1, 2, and 3, a euphonium, an alto sax 1 and 2? How do we take those chords and make them make sense? So part of this is creativity. Part of this is knowing who you're arranging for. So right here, we can already eliminate those Fs. All right, why? That's what the tuba's role is. It established that F right there to let us know, all right, this is an F minor chord. Okay, and yes, it's going to move around more, but it still establishes that. Now, when we get to right here for the GM7, well, there's no tuba right here. There's no bass line right there. The bass line doesn't come in until beat 3 and 4. So we have to represent that G somewhere within this chord structure. And then right here, the beauty of this is GM7 with C in the bass. Well, that C in the bass is just tuba. Okay, so we don't have to represent C anywhere in this chord stack. So problem is, how do we represent essentially these 4 tones within 3 trombone parts? Well, the question is, you don't. Typically, you will just keep it with a trombone 1, 2, and 3, and that's it. So then that's your role as an arranger, because you typically don't want to split a trombone 1 and trombone 2. Then you're lessening the sound possible for a big sound or supported chords within a marching band setting. You know, unless you have a case where you have 30 trombones, yeah, you can split up first and second, third parts, whatever, and you can add extra chord tones in there. But most of the times, you're not going to have that situation. So we have to be creative of what we do. Now, we've already been creative. So what I'm going to do is put this in concert pitch so it can make it quicker and easier for us. So this main melody, that dee 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 dee, that is already in concert G. So that's one pitch that's already taken care of, and that's always going to be taken care of in that little first part. Dee dee ba da 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 ba da 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 b dee 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 G ba 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 da ba 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 G. All right, dee 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 dee. Yeah, that G again. Ba dee da dee ba dee dee dee. All right. So in terms of good melody writing, that G is already represented. So if I'm looking at my chords, I know that's a chord tone that I can already eliminate because I don't need that chord tone. Why? It's already being represented in trumpet, it's being represented in clarinet, it's represented in piccolo. So that's a chord tone I don't have to worry about. All right, so we can go over here and take this out. So anytime we have that F minor 9, we can take these G's out. And it wouldn't affect us hearing all of those pitches because it's already represented. Sorry, let me just put trumpet and trombone so we can hear. All right, so cool. That's already represented. We don't have to worry about that. Now, when it comes terms of voicing, we've already placed some of these chord tones already. So in horn, right here, we have concert E flat and concert C. So sometimes what I will do as an arranger, if I know I have upper trombone parts, what I would do is I would copy and paste those upper chord tones within mellophone or alto sax. Why? Because that's going to be a lot easier in their range. So it may sound a bit thinner in the upper register for the trombone or euphonium, but it's in the sweet spot for mellophone. And it'll be on the lower end for alto sax, but it still can be represented well. And so those pitches, we're there. We already have that right here in horn and in alto, concert E flat, concert C. So really, those pitches are going to be heard. Now, if I want to, I can keep this written exactly how it is. All right, I can keep this written exactly how it is, and it's going to be fine. Now, there may be situations where, hey, you don't want what we call the root voicing. And let's just say if I kept the G in there, and I say, hey, that G is pretty high, I could take that G down an octave and instead put that in trombone 3, and then the next highest note essentially would be E flat. So when you're arranging, you could do situations like that where you can do inverted chords in order to either make it a easier in the playable range or to add more interest. So almost always doing inverted chords is going to add a lot more harmonic interest into your compositions. But in this situation, my trombone part is almost perfectly fine right here. Now we have the euphonium. What is the euphonium going to do? So, euphonium is a very interesting instrument. It's a very flexible instrument. You can do a lot with euphonium. Euphonium can be melody, it can be counter melody, it can support chords, it can support the bass line. Euphonium can do a lot of different things. So, in this context, if I want to just keep it simple, I can just copy whatever the trombone is doing onto that euphonium part. So, then the question comes to you as an arranger. Well, what tone do I represent for that euphonium part? The trombone 1, trombone 2, or trombone 3? All right. And honestly, I have no problem, and I'm a euphonium player. I see no problem with writing split euphonium parts. I wouldn't do 3. I would usually do 2. And sometimes what I would do, especially in my band, I may double the first trombone part on euphonium and then double the third trombone part also on euphonium. So I'll just eliminate whatever that middle harmony is. So that way my stronger euphonium players can play the upper part, and then my developing euphonium players can play that lower part. But let's just say we're talking actual instruments. So I did a video on my other channel where I compared different types of euphoniums and in the marching band setting. And when you have a actual marching euphonium with those giant bells and that really dark, rich sound, putting those in the lower register really helps out. So if I were to take these right here and copy and paste it right here, for whatever reason, Finale puts it down an octave, and just keep it right there, that's going to fill up that lower sound a lot. That's going to fill up that lower sound a whole lot. So, and in this context, like I already said, first and second trombone, those pitches are being copied within mellophone and alto sax. You know, alto sax part is an octave higher. Those tones are still being very well represented. So, if I want these sounds to come out a little bit more, the lower voices, lower harmonies, which typically those are the harmonies going to be harder to hear because they're lower, I'll put it in euphonium. And we kind of already did that. If we look up here with tenor sax, we kind of represented that already right here with that tenor sax. So I would just continue to give the euphonium these lower parts right here. because this is slightly different. I'll copy it right here. Okay. Now, this will also solve another issue we have. So right here, in the second set of chords, all right, we have a legitimate 4-stack chords. Tuba right here is not representing that lower G. Now, if you want it as a arranger to fill that out, make something right there with the tuba part, you absolutely could. But if we're trying to follow bass line that's close to the bass line of the song, there's nothing here. There's that little space in there. So because I have now this, the G represented right here in the euphonium part, I can eliminate this right here. All right, and boom, that problem where we have a 4 notes in that chord. Now that euphonium is playing the role of that lower harmony. Okay, and let's see what we got. All right, great. Now let's add the other instruments back in. So let's add horn, tenor, alto, clarinet, and piccolo. Let's add all these voices back in, and let's see what we got. All right, and then what I'll probably do right here, this end part, we have some clashing sounds. So we have some clashing sounds over here, and that's mostly just because of how the melody um, goes right here. Um, I will admit it's a very weird situation because remember we're concert pitch. So when you're in concert pitch, essentially where these notes are on this staff, that's how close they are. So if we look right here with horn and trumpet, the clash is coming from horn having D, D, and F, F. Well, trumpet has E, G, E, C. So it's going to clash. The D is going to clash with E, and that F is going to clash with that G. All right. So this is where we will have to be a little bit more creative from an arranger standpoint. So we can't just copy and paste right here because as we hear, there's that little bit of a crunch right here. So we'll have to do something here to make this make sense. So what I can do, let's see. So we have B flat, D, and F. All right. So I might just put 2 B flats right there. And if I do the same thing for alto, let's see how that affects that. All right, it's a lot less crunchy, but there's still a bit of a crunch right there. All right, so what we can do, what is the other pitch right here? We have G. Oh, okay, so we have concert G. So because right, it's a G minor chord. So if we want to play it safe, we can give those 2 G's. Let's see how that sounds. All right, and that really solves the clashing issue right there because that concert E flat is going to work well that G just because of the type of chord that we're doing with. So because the tonic note right there is that G. So That's going to work in in this situation. Um, if I wanted to still keep chords, I can still put the B flat right there, and it gives a little bit of a crunch, but nowhere near as bad of a crunch that we had before. Okay, so again, voicing matters a lot. Voicing matters a lot into the sound of our arrangement, the sound that we want from our band, and understanding your instrument ranges, where they're going to be the most powerful, where they're going to make the most sense in terms of harmonies, as well as the blend within other instruments, makes a huge deal in the playability of your arrangements, but also the timbre, the sound, what you're looking for in that arrangement. All of that matters when you're talking about texture, timbre, range, and voicing. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Hope this gave you some better understanding of how ranges work within your arrangement. And obviously, when you're dealing with a MIDI sound like this with Finale, you're not going to get the perfect representation of those instruments. But that's part of being an arranger, is seeing what works, seeing what fits, and I cannot stress enough hearing your arrangements live. When you hear your arrangements live, you do really grow as an arranger, because that allows you to see, all right, that worked better than I expected. Or, hey, it sounded good on Finale, or it sounded good on MuseScore, but it did not sound good live. Why was that the case? And then you begin to develop your skills as an arranger, because then you can start problem solving. You can start seeing what works in the real world, what works with the digital version, and then what works in a practical sense on getting the best sound out of your band. So thank you for watching towards the end. Again, this is a series of arranging tutorials. So if this helped you out, please share the video to other arrangers, like it, and you can subscribe to this channel for more tips, more tutorials, and my arrangements that I post on here for sale. So thank you all. Once again, my name is Brian, and thank you for watching. Have a good one.